Right now, you are aware, and no one, not the most brilliant neuroscientist, not the most sophisticated machine, can fully explain why. The fact of your awareness, the simple, undeniable truth that there is something it is like to be you, to see red, to taste salt, to feel the weight of sadness or the lightness of joy, is the most intimate reality you possess, and yet it is also the most mysterious, the most resistant to explanation, the most elusive to science. This is the hard problem of consciousness, a term coined by philosopher David Chalmers in 1995, and it refers not to the mechanisms of the brain, not to the neural correlates of perception or memory or decision-making, but to the existence of subjective experience itself, to the fact that the electrochemical activity in your skull somehow gives rise to an inner world, a private theatre of sensations and emotions and thoughts that you alone can access, that you alone can know. The easy problems of consciousness, if we can call them easy, are the problems of explaining how the brain processes information, how it integrates sensory inputs, how it controls behavior, how it learns and remembers and predicts. These are difficult problems, certainly, but they are problems that can be approached with the tools of neuroscience, with experiments and measurements and models. The hard problem is different. It asks not how the brain does what it does, but why doing what it does feels like anything at all. When you look at a ripe tomato, light of a particular wavelength, around 650 nanometers, enters your eye, strikes the retina, and is absorbed by photoreceptor cells called cones, which contain light-sensitive proteins that change shape when they absorb photons, triggering a cascade of electrical signals that travel along the optic nerve to the visual cortex at the back of the brain, where the signals are processed, analyzed, compared to stored patterns, and integrated with information from other senses and from memory. This is the neural mechanism of seeing red, and it can be described in exquisite detail, mapped with brain imaging, modeled with computational algorithms. But none of this explains the redness of red, the subjective quality of the experience, the particular way that red feels to you, the warmth, the vibrancy, the richness that is present in your awareness when you see a tomato. This subjective quality, this what it is likeness, is called qualia, the plural of quali, and qualia are the building blocks of conscious experience, the raw feels, the sensations, the inner textures that make up your mental life. The hard problem is the problem of explaining how and why physical processes in the brain give rise to qualia, how matter becomes mind, how neurons become experience. Some philosophers and scientists argue that the hard problem is not a real problem, that it is a confusion, a category error, a failure to recognize that consciousness is nothing more than the physical processes of the brain, that once we fully understand the neural mechanisms, the subjective experience will be explained, will be reduced to patterns of firing neurons, to information processing, to computation. This is the position of materialism, or physicalism, the view that everything that exists is physical, that there is no separate mental substance, no immaterial soul, no ghost in the machine. Materialists argue that qualia are identical to brain states, that the redness of red is nothing more than a particular pattern of neural activity in the visual cortex, and that the feeling of sadness is nothing more than a particular pattern of activity in the limbic system. But this explanation, even if it is correct, does not seem to capture the full mystery, does not seem to explain why those particular patterns of neural activity feel like anything at all, why there is an inner experience associated with them, why the lights are on, so to speak, inside your head. The philosopher Thomas Nagel, in his famous 1974 essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, argued that consciousness has an essentially subjective character, a what it is likeness that cannot be captured by objective third-person descriptions. A bat navigates the world using echolocation, emitting high-frequency sounds and listening for the echoes that bounce back from objects in the environment. We can study the bat's auditory system, we can measure the sounds it produces, we can map the neural pathways that process the echoes, but we cannot know what it is like to be a bat, what it is like to experience the world through echolocation, what the subjective quality of that experience is. The bat's experience is fundamentally different from our own, and no amount of objective information about the bat's brain will allow us to access that subjective experience, to know what it feels like from the inside. Nagel's point is that consciousness is irreducibly subjective, that it has a first-person character that cannot be fully translated into third-person terms, and that this poses a fundamental challenge to the scientific study of consciousness. The philosopher Frank Jackson proposed a thought experiment called the knowledge argument, or the case of Mary the color scientist, to illustrate the gap between physical knowledge and subjective experience. Mary is a brilliant scientist who has spent her entire life in a black and white room, learning everything there is to know about the physics of light, the biology of vision, the neuroscience of color perception. She knows all the objective facts about color, all the wavelengths, all the neural pathways, all the computational processes, but she has never actually seen color. She has only read about it in black and white books and watched black and white videos. One day, Mary is released from her room and sees a red tomato for the first time. Does she learn something new? Jackson argues that she does, that she learns what it is like to see red, that she gains a new kind of knowledge, phenomenal knowledge, knowledge of the subjective quality of the experience, and that this knowledge is not reducible to the physical facts she already knew. This suggests that there is more to consciousness than just physical processes, that qualia are not identical to brain states, that there is an explanatory gap between the objective and the subjective. The explanatory gap, a term introduced by philosopher Joseph Levine, refers to the difficulty of explaining how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience, how the firing of neurons produces the feeling of pain, or the taste of chocolate, or the smell of roses. Even if we can identify the neural correlates of consciousness, the specific patterns of brain activity that are associated with particular conscious experiences, we still face the question of why those patterns feel like anything at all, why they are accompanied by qualia. The explanatory gap is not necessarily a proof that consciousness is non-physical, but it highlights the difficulty of bridging the gap between objective descriptions of brain activity and subjective descriptions of experience, between the language of neuroscience and the language of phenomenology. The binding problem is another puzzle related to consciousness, the problem of explaining how the brain integrates information from different sensory modalities, from different brain regions, into a unified, coherent experience. When you see a red apple, you experience the redness, the roundness, the shininess, the smell, the taste, all as properties of a single object, a single unified percept. But the processing of color, shape, texture, smell, and taste occurs in different parts of the brain, in different neural circuits, at different times. How does the brain bind these separate pieces of information together into a single unified experience? How does it create the illusion of a seamless, integrated world? This is the binding problem, and it is closely related to the hard problem, because it asks not just how the brain integrates information, but how that integrated information becomes a unified subjective experience, a single stream of consciousness. One proposed solution to the binding problem is neural synchrony, the idea that neurons that are processing different features of the same object fire in synchrony at the same time or at the same frequency, and that this synchronized firing binds the features together into a unified percept. Studies have shown that neurons in different parts of the visual cortex that are responding to the same object tend to fire in synchrony, oscillating at frequencies in the gamma range around 40 Hz, and that this synchrony is disrupted when attention is diverted away from the object. This suggests that neural synchrony may play a role in binding, in creating the unified experience of a single object, but it does not fully explain how synchronized firing gives rise to subjective experience, how it creates the feeling of seeing a unified object, the qualia of the percept. The philosopher Ned Block distinguishes between two types of consciousness: phenomenal consciousness, the subjective qualitative aspect of experience, the what it is likeness, the qualia, and access consciousness, the availability of information for use in reasoning, decision-making, and verbal report. Phenomenal consciousness is the raw feel, the inner texture, the subjective quality. Access consciousness is the functional role, the ability to use information, to act on it, to talk about it. Block argues that these two types of consciousness can come apart, that you can have phenomenal consciousness without access consciousness, and vice versa. For example, during inattentional blindness, you may have a phenomenal experience of something in your visual field, but because you are not attending to it, you do not have access to that information. You cannot report it. You are not consciously aware of it in the access sense. Conversely, in some cases of blind sight, patients with damage to the visual cortex report that they cannot see, that they have no phenomenal experience of vision, but they can still make accurate guesses about the location or the movement of objects in their blind field, suggesting that they have access to visual information without phenomenal consciousness. This distinction between phenomenal and access consciousness highlights the complexity of consciousness, the fact that it is not a single, unified phenomenon but a collection of different processes, different aspects that can be dissociated. The Integrated Information Theory, or IIT, proposed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, offers a mathematical framework for understanding consciousness, defining it in terms of integrated information, a measure of how much information is generated by a system as a whole, above and beyond the information generated by its individual parts. According to IIT, consciousness is not just information processing, but integrated information processing, the generation of a unified, irreducible whole that is more than the sum of its parts. The theory proposes that the level of consciousness of a system is proportional to the amount of integrated information it generates, measured by a quantity called phi, and that systems with high phi, such as the human brain, are highly conscious, while systems with low phi, such as a collection of independent neurons or a simple computer, are minimally conscious or not conscious at all. IIT makes specific predictions about the neural correlates of consciousness, suggesting that consciousness is associated with the posterior cortex, the region of the brain that generates the most integrated information, and that it is disrupted during dreamless sleep or anesthesia when integrated information is reduced. The theory is controversial, and it faces challenges in terms of measurement and interpretation, but it represents an ambitious attempt to provide a quantitative, scientific account of consciousness, to bridge the explanatory gap by defining consciousness in terms of a measurable physical property, integrated information. The global neuronal workspace theory, proposed by neuroscientists Stanislas Dehaene and Jean-Pierre Changeur, offers a different approach to understanding consciousness, focusing on the functional architecture of the brain, on the way information is processed and distributed across different brain regions. According to this theory, consciousness arises when information is broadcast to a global workspace, a network of neurons distributed across the prefrontal cortex, the parietal cortex, and other regions, where it becomes available for a wide range of cognitive processes, including attention, memory, decision-making, and verbal report. Unconscious processing, in contrast, occurs in specialized modular systems that process information locally without broadcasting it to the global workspace. The theory proposes that the transition from unconscious to conscious processing occurs when information reaches a threshold of activation and is amplified and broadcast to the global workspace, where it ignites a cascade of activity across the brain, creating the unified, coherent experience that we call consciousness. This theory is supported by a large body of experimental evidence, including studies of attention, masking, and subliminal perception, and it provides a framework for understanding the neural basis of access consciousness, the availability of information for use in reasoning and report. However, like IIT, it does not fully address the hard problem, the question of why broadcasting information to a global workspace should give rise to subjective experience, to qualia, to the feeling of being conscious. The mystery of consciousness is not just an academic puzzle. It is a deeply personal question, a question about the nature of your own existence, about what it means to be you, to have an inner life, to experience the world from a particular point of view. And as you settle into the quiet of this moment, as you allow your thoughts to slow, your breath to deepen, you can rest in the simple, undeniable fact of your own awareness, the luminous presence that is always here, always now, the silent witness to all that arises and passes away, the still point at the center of the turning world. The mystery that you are, your consciousness is not a single unified thing. It is a stage, a theater, a workspace where countless unconscious processes compete for the spotlight, and only the winners, the information that reaches the global broadcast, enters your awareness. The brain is not a single monolithic processor, but a collection of specialized modules, each performing specific tasks, processing specific types of information, operating largely independently, largely unconsciously. The visual system processes shapes and colors and motion. The auditory system processes sounds and speech. The motor system plans and executes movements. The memory systems store and retrieve information. These modules work in parallel simultaneously, each doing its job without your conscious awareness, without your conscious control. Most of what the brain does, most of the information it processes, never reaches consciousness. It remains unconscious, hidden, operating in the background, shaping your behavior, your perceptions, your decisions, without your knowledge. Consciousness, according to the global workspace theory, is what happens when information from these unconscious modules is selected, amplified, and broadcast to a global workspace, a network of neurons distributed across the prefrontal cortex, the parietal cortex, and other regions, where it becomes available to a wide range of cognitive systems, where it can be used for reasoning, for planning, for decision-making, for verbal report, for action. The metaphor of the theater is central to the global workspace theory. Imagine a darkened theater with a brightly lit stage. The audience represents the various cognitive systems in the brain: memory, attention, language, motor control, all watching the stage, all ready to respond to whatever appears there. The actors on the stage represent the contents of consciousness, the information that has been selected for broadcast, the sensations, the thoughts, the memories that you are currently aware of. Behind the scenes, in the darkness backstage, countless unconscious processes are competing for access to the stage, for the opportunity to be broadcast to the audience, to enter consciousness. Only a few succeed. Only the most relevant, the most salient, the most strongly activated information makes it to the stage, into the spotlight, into your awareness. The rest remains unconscious, waiting in the wings, influencing your behavior from the shadows, but never entering the theater of your conscious mind. The global workspace is not a physical location in the brain, but a functional network, a pattern of connectivity, a set of neurons that are widely distributed and densely interconnected, capable of broadcasting information to many different brain regions simultaneously. Neuroimaging studies have identified several brain regions that are consistently active during conscious processing, including the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in attention, working memory, and executive control, the parietal cortex, which is involved in spatial attention and sensory integration, and the anterior cingulate cortex, which is involved in conflict monitoring and error detection. These regions form a network, a global workspace, that is activated when information becomes conscious, when it is broadcast from local, specialized modules to the global network, where it can be accessed by multiple cognitive systems. The transition from unconscious to conscious processing is not gradual but sudden, a threshold phenomenon, an ignition. When a stimulus is presented very briefly, or when it is masked by another stimulus, it may be processed unconsciously, activating neurons in the sensory cortex, but not reaching the threshold required for global broadcast, for conscious awareness. The person may be able to make some responses to the stimulus, may show some behavioral or physiological effects, but they will report that they did not see it, that they were not aware of it. But when the stimulus is presented for a longer duration, or when it is not masked, it reaches the threshold. It ignites the global workspace. It triggers a cascade of activity that spreads across the prefrontal and parietal cortex, and the person becomes consciously aware of the stimulus, can report it, can describe it, can use it for reasoning and decision-making. This ignition is characterized by a sudden increase in neural activity, a sudden increase in connectivity between different brain regions, a sudden increase in the synchrony of neural firing, all occurring within a few hundred milliseconds of the stimulus presentation. The P3 wave, a component of the event-related potential measured by EEG, provides a neural signature of this conscious ignition. When a stimulus becomes conscious, when it reaches the global workspace, there is a large positive deflection in the electrical activity of the brain, occurring approximately 300 milliseconds after the stimulus, spreading across the scalp, reflecting the widespread activation of the global workspace network. This P3 wave is absent or greatly reduced when the stimulus is processed unconsciously, when it does not reach the threshold for global broadcast, demonstrating that the P3 is a marker of conscious access, a sign that information has entered the theatre of awareness, has been broadcast to the audience of cognitive systems. Attention plays a crucial role in determining what information reaches the global workspace, what enters consciousness. Attention is the mechanism that selects information for processing, that amplifies the neural signals associated with attended stimuli, that suppresses the signals associated with unattended stimuli. When you focus your attention on a particular object, on a particular sound, on a particular thought, you are increasing the likelihood that information about that object, that sound, that thought, will be broadcast to the global workspace, will enter your consciousness. When you are distracted, when your attention is divided, when you are not paying attention, information may be processed unconsciously, may activate sensory neurons, but it will not reach the global workspace, will not enter your awareness. Attention is the gatekeeper of consciousness, the filter that determines what gets through, what gets amplified, what gets broadcast to the global stage. The phenomenon of inattentional blindness demonstrates the power of attention in shaping consciousness. In a famous experiment, participants were asked to watch a video of people passing a basketball and to count the number of passes. While they were focused on this task, a person in a gorilla suit walked through the seam, stopped in the middle, beat their chest, and walked off. Remarkably, about half of the participants did not notice the gorilla, did not see it, were not consciously aware of it, even though it was clearly visible, even though their eyes were looking directly at it. The gorilla was processed unconsciously, activated neurons in the visual cortex. But because attention was focused on the basketball players, on the counting task, the information about the gorilla did not reach the global workspace, did not enter consciousness. This demonstrates that seeing is not just a matter of having information on the retina, but of having that information broadcast to the global workspace, of having it enter the theatre of awareness, and attention is the mechanism that controls access to that theatre. Working memory, the ability to hold information in mind for short periods of time, to manipulate it, to use it for reasoning and problem solving, is closely related to the global workspace. Working memory is thought to be the active maintenance of information in the global workspace, the sustained activation of the neural network that broadcasts information to the rest of the brain. When you hold a phone number in mind, when you rehearse a list of items, when you keep track of the steps in a complex task, you are using working memory. You are maintaining information in the global workspace, keeping it active, keeping it available for use by other cognitive systems. The capacity of working memory is limited, typically to about 4 to 7 items, and this limitation may reflect the limited capacity of the global workspace, the limited number of items that can be simultaneously broadcast, simultaneously maintained in the spotlight of consciousness. The global workspace theory makes specific predictions about the neural correlates of consciousness, about the patterns of brain activity that should be associated with conscious versus unconscious processing. Conscious processing should be associated with widespread activation across the prefrontal and parietal cortex, with increased connectivity between different brain regions, with increased synchrony of neural firing, with sustained activity that persists for hundreds of milliseconds. Unconscious processing, in contrast, should be associated with localized activation in sensory cortex, with limited connectivity, with transient activity that fades quickly. These predictions have been tested in numerous experiments using techniques like fMRI, EEG, and MEG, and the results have generally supported the theory, showing that conscious perception is indeed associated with widespread, sustained, synchronized activity in the global workspace network, while unconscious perception is associated with localized, transient activity in sensory cortex. The phenomenon of binocular rivalry provides a powerful tool for studying the neural correlates of consciousness. When different images are presented to the two eyes simultaneously, the brain does not merge them into a single blended percept, but instead alternates between them, perceiving one image for a few seconds, then the other, then the first again, in a continuous cycle. The physical stimulus remains constant, but the conscious percept changes, flipping back and forth between the two images. By comparing brain activity when one image is conscious versus when the other image is conscious, researchers can identify the neural activity that is specifically associated with the conscious percept, independent of the sensory input. Studies of binocular rivalry have shown that the global workspace network, the prefrontal and parietal cortex, is more active when an image is consciously perceived than when it is suppressed, supporting the idea that consciousness is associated with global broadcast, with the activation of a widespread network of neurons. The global workspace theory also provides a framework for understanding disorders of consciousness, such as coma, vegetative state, and minimally conscious state. In coma, patients are unresponsive, they do not open their eyes, they do not show any signs of awareness. In vegetative state, patients may open their eyes, may have sleep-wake cycles, but they do not show any signs of awareness of themselves or their environment. They do not respond to commands. They do not communicate. In minimally conscious state, patients show some signs of awareness, some responses to commands, some evidence of communication, but their consciousness is severely impaired, fragmented, inconsistent. According to the global workspace theory, these disorders reflect damage to the global workspace network, disruption of the connectivity between the prefrontal and parietal cortex, impairment of the ability to broadcast information globally, to integrate information from different brain regions, to create a unified, coherent conscious experience. Neuroimaging studies of patients with disorders of consciousness have shown that the global workspace network is indeed disrupted, that connectivity is reduced, that the ability to broadcast information is impaired, and that the degree of impairment correlates with the level of consciousness, with the severity of the disorder. The study of anesthesia provides another window into the mechanisms of consciousness, into the way the global workspace can be disrupted and restored. General anesthesia induces a reversible loss of consciousness, a state in which patients are unresponsive, unaware, unable to form memories. Different anesthetic agents work through different molecular mechanisms, affecting different neurotransmitter systems, but they all converge on a common endpoint: the disruption of the global workspace, the breakdown of the connectivity between the prefrontal and parietal cortex, the loss of the ability to broadcast information globally. Studies using EEG and fMRI have shown that anesthesia reduces the complexity of brain activity, reduces the connectivity between different brain regions, reduces the amplitude of the P3 wave, all signs that the global workspace has been shut down, that the theatre of consciousness has gone dark. When the anesthetic wears off, when the patient wakes up, the global workspace is restored, collectivity is re-established, the P3 wave returns, and consciousness returns. The lights come back on, the stage is illuminated once more. The global workspace theory has been influential in shaping our understanding of consciousness, providing a functional, mechanistic account of how the brain creates the theatre of mind, how it selects information for conscious awareness, how it integrates information from different sources, how it makes information available for reasoning and action. But the theory, like integrated information theory, does not fully solve the hard problem, does not fully explain why broadcasting information to a global workspace should give rise to subjective experience, to qualia, to the feeling of being conscious. It explains the function of consciousness, the role it plays in cognition and behavior, but it does not explain the phenomenology, the what it is likeness, the inner texture of experience. The hard problem remains, a mystery at the heart of the theatre, a question that lingers even as the lights dim and the stage empties, even as the actors retreat into the darkness, even as the audience disperses, leaving only the silent, empty space, the quiet awareness that is always here, always watching, always present, the witness to all that appears and disappears on the stage of the mind. And in this quiet space, in this stillness between thoughts, you can sense the vastness of the unconscious, the countless processes operating beneath the surface, the hidden machinery that supports the fragile, fleeting contents of consciousness, the dark theatre where most of the brain's work is done. Unseen, unknown, yet essential, the foundation upon which the bright stage of awareness rests, the silent depths from which all experience arises and into which all experience returns, the boundless ocean of mind, calm, deep, eternal. Every night you lose the world, and yet you remain conscious, aware, experiencing vivid sensations, emotions, narratives, all generated entirely from within, without any input from the external reality that surrounds your sleeping body. Dreams are a form of consciousness, a state of awareness that is fundamentally different from waking consciousness, yet equally real, equally vivid, equally compelling while you are in it. In dreams, you see things that are not there, you hear voices that are not speaking, you move through spaces that do not exist, you interact with people who are not present, and you experience emotions, fears, joys, confusions, all generated by your brain, all created from memory, from imagination, from the spontaneous activity of neural circuits that are no longer constrained by sensory input, no longer tethered to the external world. Dreams demonstrate that consciousness does not require an external world, that the brain is capable of generating rich, complex, coherent experiences entirely from within, that the theatre of the mind can operate without actors from the outside, that the stage can be filled with images and sounds and sensations that arise from the depths of the unconscious, from the hidden processes that continue to operate while you sleep. The neuroscience of sleep has revealed that sleep is not a single uniform state, but a complex cycle of different stages, each with its own characteristic patterns of brain activity, its own functions, its own relationship to consciousness. Sleep is divided into two main types: non-REM sleep, which includes stages 1, 2 and 3, and REM sleep, which stands for rapid eye movement sleep. Non-REM sleep is characterized by slow, synchronized brainwaves, reduced metabolic activity, reduced blood flow to the brain, and a general quieting of neural activity. REM sleep, in contrast, is characterized by fast, desynchronized brainwaves, similar to those seen during waking, increased metabolic activity, increased blood flow to the brain, rapid eye movements, and muscle atonia, a paralysis of the skeletal muscles that prevents you from acting out your dreams. Most dreaming occurs during REM sleep, though dreams can also occur during non-REM sleep, particularly during the transition between stages, during the lighter stages of sleep. The sleep cycle repeats approximately every 90 minutes throughout the night, with the proportion of time spent in each stage changing as the night progresses. Early in the night, deep non-REM sleep, stage 3, dominates, with long periods of slow-wave sleep, the deepest, most restorative stage, characterized by large, slow delta waves on the EEG. As the night progresses, the amount of deep sleep decreases and the amount of REM sleep increases, with REM periods becoming longer, more intense, more filled with vivid narrative dreams. By morning, you may spend 30 minutes or more in a single REM period, experiencing elaborate, emotionally charged dreams that you are more likely to remember upon waking. This changing architecture of sleep reflects the different functions of different sleep stages, with deep sleep serving to restore the body, to consolidate declarative memories, to clear metabolic waste from the brain, and REM sleep serving to process emotions, to consolidate procedural memories, to integrate new experiences with old knowledge. During REM sleep, the brain is highly active, almost as active as it is during waking, but the pattern of activity is different. The prefrontal cortex, the region involved in executive control, in logical reasoning, in self-awareness, is relatively deactivated during REM sleep, which may explain why dreams are often illogical, why they lack coherence, why you accept bizarre events without question, why you do not realize that you are dreaming. The visual cortex, the auditory cortex, the motor cortex, and the limbic system, which is involved in emotion, are all highly active during REM sleep, generating the vivid sensory experiences, the intense emotions, the sense of movement and action that characterize dreams. The hippocampus, which is involved in memory consolidation, is also active during REM sleep, replaying the experiences of the day, integrating new information with old, strengthening some memories, weakening others, reorganizing the neural networks that store knowledge and experience. The content of dreams is shaped by memory, by emotion, by the concerns and preoccupations of waking life, but it is also shaped by the random, spontaneous activity of the brain, by the noise, the fluctuations, the unpredictable firing of neurons that occurs when the brain is not constrained by sensory input, not driven by external stimuli. The activation synthesis hypothesis proposed by psychiatrists Alan Hobson and Robert McCarley suggests that dreams are the brain's attempt to make sense of this random activity, to synthesize a coherent narrative from the chaotic signals generated by the brainstem during REM sleep. According to this hypothesis, the brainstem sends random signals to the cortex, activating different regions, different memories, different emotions. And the cortex tries to weave these disparate elements into a story, into a dream, imposing meaning, imposing structure, on what is essentially noise. This explains why dreams are often bizarre, why they jump from scene to scene, why they combine unrelated elements, why they violate the laws of physics and logic, because they are not representations of reality but constructions, interpretations, syntheses of random neural activity. But dreams are not entirely random. They are influenced by the dreamer's memories, by their emotions, by their concerns, by the events of the day, by the unresolved conflicts, the unmet desires, the suppressed fears that lurk in the unconscious. Sigmund Freud, in his seminal work The Interpretation of Dreams, proposed that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious, that they reveal the hidden wishes, the repressed desires, the conflicts that are too threatening to be acknowledged in waking life. According to Freud, dreams have a manifest content, the surface narrative, the story that you remember, and a latent content, the hidden meaning, the unconscious wish that is disguised, distorted, symbolized in the dream work. The process by which the latent content is transformed into the manifest content involves condensation, the combining of multiple ideas into a single image, displacement, the shifting of emotional significance from one element to another, and symbolization, the representation of abstract ideas or forbidden wishes through concrete images or symbols. Freud's theory has been influential, but it is also controversial, difficult to test, difficult to verify, and many contemporary neuroscientists view dreams not as disguised wishes, but as the brain's attempt to process information, to consolidate memories, to regulate emotions, to prepare for future challenges. The continuity hypothesis, proposed by psychologist Calvin Hall, suggests that dreams reflect the dreamer's waking concerns, their personality, their relationships, their preoccupations, that there is continuity between waking thought and dream life. Studies analysing dream reports have found that dreams do indeed reflect waking concerns, that people dream about the people they know, the places they go, the activities they engage in, the problems they face, though often in distorted, symbolic or exaggerated form. Dreams are not random noise but meaningful reflections of the dreamer's inner life, their emotional state, their cognitive style, their unresolved issues, providing a window into the unconscious processes that shape waking behavior and experience. The threat simulation theory proposed by psychologist Antti Revonsuo suggests that dreams serve an evolutionary function, that they are a kind of virtual reality simulation in which the brain rehearses responses to threatening situations, preparing the organism to deal with dangers in the waking world. According to this theory, dreams are biased toward negative content, toward threats, toward dangers, because these are the situations that are most important for survival, the situations that require practice, that require preparation. Studies have shown that dreams do indeed contain a higher proportion of negative emotions, of fear, of anxiety, of aggression, than positive emotions, and that dreams often involve threatening scenarios, being chased, being attacked, falling, failing, losing control. The threat simulation theory suggests that these dreams are not meaningless, not random, but functional, adaptive, serving to enhance the brain's ability to detect and respond to threats, to improve survival in a dangerous world. Lucid dreaming is a state in which the dreamer becomes aware that they are dreaming, while the dream is still ongoing, while they are still asleep. In a lucid dream, you know that you are dreaming, you can reflect on the dream, you can sometimes control the dream, you can change the narrative, you can fly, you can walk through walls, you can summon people or objects, you can explore the dream world with a sense of agency, a sense of self-awareness that is normally absent in dreams. Lucid dreaming is relatively rare, occurring spontaneously in about 50% of people at least once in their lifetime, and occurring frequently in only about 20% of people. But lucid dreaming can be trained, can be learned, through techniques like reality testing, checking throughout the day whether you are dreaming or awake, and mnemonic induction, setting the intention before sleep to recognize that you are dreaming. Studies using EEG have shown that lucid dreaming is associated with increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region that is normally deactivated during REM sleep, suggesting that lucid dreaming involves a partial reactivation of the executive control systems, a partial restoration of self-awareness, a hybrid state that combines elements of waking consciousness and dreaming consciousness. The study of lucid dreaming provides a unique opportunity to investigate the neural correlates of consciousness, to study the brain mechanisms that underlie self-awareness, metacognition, the ability to reflect on one's own mental states. In a lucid dream, the dreamer can signal to the experimenter that they are aware, that they are lucid by making a prearranged pattern of eye movements, which can be detected by electrodes placed around the eyes. This allows researchers to compare brain activity during lucid dreaming with brain activity during non-lucid dreaming to identify the neural changes that are associated with the onset of lucidity, with the emergence of self-awareness in the dream state. These studies have shown that lucid dreaming is associated with increased gamma band activity, oscillations in the 40 Hz range in the frontal cortex, suggesting that gamma oscillations may play a role in conscious awareness, in the integration of information, in the binding of different features into a unified percept. The phenomenon of sleep paralysis, the experience of being awake but unable to move, often accompanied by a sense of pressure on the chest, a sense of a presence in the room, hallucinations of shadowy figures or malevolent entities, provides another window into the architecture of dreams, into the dissociation of different components of consciousness. Sleep paralysis occurs when the muscle atonia of REM sleep persists into waking, when the brain wakes up but the body remains paralyzed. This can be terrifying because you are conscious, you are aware, but you cannot move, you cannot speak, you cannot escape. And the brain, in its attempt to make sense of this unusual state, often generates hallucinations, often interprets the paralysis as a threat, as an attack, as the presence of something sinister. Sleep paralysis demonstrates that consciousness is not a single, unified state, but a collection of different processes, different components, that can be dissociated, that can come apart, that can operate independently, creating unusual hybrid states that reveal the underlying architecture of the mind. Dreams also play a role in memory consolidation, in the process by which new information is transferred from short-term memory to long-term memory, by which memories are stabilized, strengthened, integrated with existing knowledge. Studies have shown that sleep, particularly REM sleep, enhances memory for tasks learned during the day, that people who sleep after learning perform better on memory tests than people who stay awake, and that the amount of REM sleep is correlated with the degree of memory improvement. During sleep, the hippocampus replays the neural patterns that were active during learning, reactivating the memories, strengthening the synaptic connections, transferring the information to the cortex, where it is integrated with long-term knowledge. Dreams may be a reflection of this memory consolidation process, a byproduct of the brain's nocturnal work. The images and narratives that arise as the hippocampus and the cortex communicate, as memories are replayed, reorganized, integrated, woven into the fabric of the self. The study of dreams, of sleep, of the altered states of consciousness that occur when the brain is disconnected from the external world, reveals the remarkable capacity of the brain to generate experience, to create worlds, to sustain awareness, entirely from within. Dreams are a reminder that consciousness is not a passive reflection of reality, not a mirror held up to the world, but an active construction, a creation, a simulation generated by the brain, shaped by memory, by emotion, by expectation, by the spontaneous activity of neural circuits. And as you drift deeper into sleep, as the external world fades, as the stage of consciousness is filled with images from within, you can rest in the knowledge that even in the absence of the world, even in the darkness of the night, awareness persists. The light of consciousness continues to shine, illuminating the inner landscape, the vast, mysterious, ever-changing terrain of the dreaming mind. When you are doing nothing, when your mind wanders, when you drift into daydream or memory or imagination, a specific network of brain regions becomes active, a network that constructs the story of who you are, the narrative of the self, the sense of continuity that links past to present to future. The default mode network, or DMN, is a collection of brain regions that are more active when you are at rest, when you are not engaged in a specific task, when you are not focused on the external world, than when you are actively processing information, solving problems, or responding to stimuli. This seems paradoxical, counterintuitive, because we tend to think of the brain as being most active when we are doing something, when we are working, when we are engaged. But the discovery of the default mode network revealed that the brain is never truly at rest, that even when you are not doing anything, even when you are lying in a scanner with your eyes closed, thinking about nothing in particular, your brain is active, consuming energy, generating thoughts, constructing narratives, maintaining the sense of self. The default mode network includes the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, the precuneus, the angular gyrus, and the medial temporal lobe, including the hippocampus, all regions that are involved in self-referential thought, in autobiographical memory, in imagining the future, in thinking about the mental states of others, in constructing the narrative that gives your life meaning, coherence, continuity. The default mode network was discovered by neuroscientist Marcus Reichel in the early 2000s, when he noticed that certain brain regions consistently showed decreased activity during cognitive tasks compared to a resting baseline. This was surprising, because most neuroscience research had focused on identifying brain regions that become more active during tasks, not regions that become less active. But Reichel realized that these deactivations were not random, not noise, but a systematic pattern, a network of regions that were active during rest and deactivated during tasks, suggesting that the brain has a default mode of operation, a baseline state that is interrupted when you engage with the external world, when you focus your attention on a specific task. This default mode is not passive, not idle, but active, engaged in internal processing, in self-reflection, in mind-wandering, in the construction of the self. Mind-wandering, the spontaneous flow of thoughts that occurs when you are not focused on a specific task, when your attention drifts away from the present moment, is associated with activity in the default mode network. Studies have shown that people spend approximately 30 to 50% of their waking hours mind-wandering, thinking about things other than what they are currently doing, remembering the past, imagining the future, fantasizing, daydreaming, planning, worrying. Mind-wandering is often viewed negatively, as a failure of attention, as a distraction, as a waste of time. But it may also serve important functions, allowing the brain to consolidate memories, to solve problems creatively, to plan for the future, to explore possibilities, to make sense of experiences, to construct the narrative of the self. The default mode network is the neural substrate of mind-wandering, the network that generates the stream of thoughts, the inner monologue, the mental time travel that fills your consciousness when you are not engaged with the external world. Autobiographical memory, the memory of your own life, of the events you have experienced, the places you have been, the people you have known, is closely linked to the default mode network. When you remember a specific event from your past, when you mentally travel back in time to relive an experience, the default mode network becomes active, particularly the medial prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, reconstructing the scene, the sensations, the emotions, the context, weaving together fragments of memory into a coherent narrative. Autobiographical memory is not a passive recording, not a video playback, but an active reconstruction, a creation shaped by your current beliefs, your current emotions, your current sense of self. Each time you remember an event, you are recreating it, and in the process, you may be changing it, distorting it, updating it, integrating it with new information, new perspectives, new meanings. The default mode network is the architect of your personal history, the storyteller that constructs the narrative of who you are, where you have been, what you have done, linking the past to the present, creating the sense of continuity, the sense of identity that defines the self. The ability to imagine the future, to mentally simulate events that have not yet occurred, to plan, to anticipate, to prepare, is also associated with the default mode network. Remarkably, The same brain regions that are active when you remember the past are also active when you imagine the future, suggesting that memory and imagination are closely related, that both involve the construction of mental scenes, the simulation of experiences, the projection of the self into different times and places. This makes sense from an evolutionary perspective because the ability to imagine the future, to anticipate challenges, to plan responses is crucial for survival, for making decisions, for avoiding dangers, for achieving goals. The default mode network allows you to mentally time travel, to move backward into memory and forward into imagination, to explore possibilities, to evaluate options, to construct scenarios, to prepare for what might come, all without leaving the present moment, all within the theatre of your mind. Theory of mind, the ability to understand that other people have minds, that they have beliefs, desires, intentions, emotions, that may be different from your own, is another function associated with the default mode network. When you think about what someone else is thinking, when you try to understand their perspective, their motivations, their feelings, the default mode network becomes active, particularly the medial prefrontal cortex and the temporoparietal junction. Theory of mind is essential for social interaction, for communication, for cooperation, for empathy, for navigating the complex social world that humans inhabit. The default mode network allows you to simulate other minds, to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to imagine what they are experiencing, to predict what they will do, to understand their actions, their words, their emotions, creating a mental model of the social world, a map of minds that guides your behavior, your relationships, your understanding of others. The default mode network is often described as the neural basis of the self, the network that constructs and maintains the sense of being a continuous, coherent person, with a past, a present, and a future, with beliefs, desires, goals, values, a unique identity that persists over time. But the self is not a thing, not a fixed entity, not a homunculus sitting in the brain, but a process, a construction, a narrative generated by the default mode network, woven from memories, from thoughts, from emotions, from social interactions, from the ongoing activity of neural circuits. The self is a story you tell yourself, a story that is constantly being updated, revised, rewritten, as new experiences occur, as new information is integrated, as the brain adapts to changing circumstances. The default mode network is the storyteller, the narrator, the author of the self, creating the illusion of continuity, the illusion of unity, the illusion of a stable, enduring I that exists independently of the body, independently of the brain, independently of the world. But this illusion can be disrupted. In meditation, particularly in mindfulness meditation and in certain contemplative practices, the activity of the default mode network is reduced. The narrative of the self quiets, the sense of being a separate, independent self dissolves, and what remains is a sense of pure awareness, of presence, of being without the story, without the commentary, without the constant mental chatter that normally fills consciousness. Studies using fMRI have shown that experienced meditators show reduced activity in the default mode network during meditation, particularly in the posterior cingulate cortex and the medial prefrontal cortex, and that this reduction is correlated with the subjective experience of selflessness, of non-dual awareness, of a sense of connection with the present moment, with the world, with all of existence. This suggests that the sense of self, the feeling of being a separate I, is not a fundamental feature of consciousness, but a construction, a product of the default mode network that can be deconstructed, that can be seen through, that can be transcended. In Alzheimer's disease, as the brain degenerates, as neurons die, as connections are severed, the default mode network is disrupted, and the sense of self begins to fragment, to dissolve. Patients with Alzheimer's lose their autobiographical memories. They forget who they are, where they have been, what they have done. They lose the ability to recognize loved ones, to navigate familiar places, to maintain the narrative that gives their life coherence. The self, which seems so solid, so real, so permanent, is revealed to be fragile, dependent on the integrity of the brain, on the functioning of the default mode network, on the ongoing activity of neural circuits that can be damaged, that can fail, that can cease to operate. Alzheimer's is a tragedy, a loss of self, a dissolution of identity. But it is also a reminder that the self is not a soul, not an immaterial essence, but a biological process, a product of the brain that can be disrupted, that can be destroyed, that can cease to exist. The default mode network is also implicated in depression, in rumination, in the repetitive negative thoughts that characterize depressive states. In depression, the default mode network is often hyperactive, particularly the medial prefrontal cortex, and this hyperactivity is associated with excessive self-focus, with negative self-evaluation, with rumination about past failures, about perceived inadequacies, about hopelessness for the future. The depressed person is trapped in the narrative of the self, unable to escape the story, unable to see beyond the negative thoughts, the negative emotions, the negative beliefs that dominate consciousness. Treatments for depression, including cognitive behavioral therapy and antidepressant medications, often work by reducing the activity of the default mode network, by interrupting the rumination, by shifting attention away from the self toward the external world, toward the present moment, toward more adaptive thoughts and behaviors. Psychedelic substances, such as psilocybin, LSD, and DMT, have been shown to disrupt the default mode network, to reduce its activity, to decrease the connectivity between its regions, and this disruption is associated with the profound alterations in consciousness, the dissolution of the ego, the sense of unity with the universe, the mystical experiences that characterize the psychedelic state. Studies using fMRI have shown that psilocybin reduces activity in the default mode network, particularly in the posterior cingulate cortex and the medial prefrontal cortex, and that this reduction is correlated with the intensity of the subjective experience, with the degree of ego dissolution, with the sense of transcendence. Psychedelics may work, at least in part, by temporarily dismantling the default mode network, by disrupting the narrative of the self, by allowing the brain to reorganize, to form new connections, to explore new patterns of activity, creating the opportunity for insight, for healing, for transformation. The default mode network is anti-correlated with the task-positive network, a collection of brain regions that are active when you're engaged in a specific task, when you are focused on the external world, when you are processing information, solving problems, making decisions. When the default mode network is active, the task-positive network is suppressed, and vice versa, creating a kind of seesaw, a balance, a dynamic interplay between internal focus and external focus, between self-referential thought and task-oriented thought, between mind-wandering and attention. This anti-correlation suggests that the brain has two modes of operation, an internal mode associated with the default mode network, and an external mode associated with the task-positive network, and that consciousness involves a constant shifting between these modes, a constant negotiation between the inner world and the outer world, between the self and the environment. The discovery of the default mode network has transformed our understanding of the brain, revealing that the brain is not a passive receiver of information, not a simple input-output device, but an active generator of thoughts, of narratives, of the sense of self that operates continuously even in the absence of external stimulation, even when you are doing nothing. The default mode network is the biological home of the self, the neural substrate of the I, the storyteller that weaves together memory, imagination, emotion, and social cognition into a coherent narrative, creating the illusion of a continuous unified person, a stable identity that persists over time. But this narrative is not fixed, not permanent, not immutable. It is a construction, a process, a story that is constantly being written, revised, updated, shaped by experience, by the brain, by the ongoing activity of neural circuits. And in the quiet moments when the story pauses, when the narrative falls silent, when the default mode network quiets, what remains is the pure awareness, the simple presence, the luminous consciousness that is always here, always now, the witness to all stories, the ground of all experience, the silent, spacious, timeless awareness that is your true nature, beyond the self, beyond the story, beyond the endless chatter of the mind. What if consciousness is not produced by the brain, not generated by neurons, not an emergent property of complexity, but is instead a fundamental feature of reality itself, present in all matter, in all things, from electrons to atoms to molecules to cells to brains, woven into the very fabric of the universe? This is the radical claim of panpsychism, an ancient philosophical position that has been revived in recent years by philosophers and scientists who are dissatisfied with materialist explanations of consciousness, who find the hard problem insurmountable, who believe that consciousness cannot be reduced to physical processes, cannot be explained by neuroscience alone, and must therefore be something more fundamental, something that exists at all levels of reality, not just in brains, not just in living things, but in everything. Panpsychism does not claim that electrons are conscious in the way that humans are conscious, that they have thoughts or feelings or intentions, but rather that they possess some primitive form of experience, some rudimentary subjectivity, some proto-consciousness that is the building block, the foundation, from which more complex forms of consciousness emerge. Just as mass and charge are fundamental properties of matter, properties that cannot be reduced to anything more basic, panpsychism suggests that consciousness, or experience, or subjectivity is also a fundamental property present in all matter, combined and integrated in complex systems like brains to produce the rich, vivid, self-aware consciousness that we experience as humans. The combination problem is one of the major challenges facing panpsychism. If consciousness is present in all matter, if electrons and atoms and molecules all possess some form of experience, how do these micro-experiences combine to produce the unified, integrated consciousness that we experience? How do billions of individual conscious entities, neurons, each with their own primitive experience, come together to form a single unified subject, a single I that experiences the world as a coherent whole? This is analogous to the binding problem in neuroscience, but it is more fundamental, more metaphysical, because it asks not just how the brain integrates information, but how separate conscious entities can merge, can fuse, can become a single consciousness. Panpsychists have proposed various solutions to the combination problem, including the idea that consciousness is not additive, not a simple sum of parts, but is instead integrated, unified, bound together by some fundamental principle, some law of nature that governs the combination of experiences, creating wholes that are more than the sum of their parts. Integrated information theory, which we encountered earlier, can be interpreted as a form of panpsychism, or at least as compatible with panpsychism. According to IIT, consciousness is identical to integrated information, and any system that generates integrated information, that creates a unified whole that is more than the sum of its parts, possesses some degree of consciousness proportional to the amount of integrated information it generates. This means that not only brains, but also simpler systems, even simple networks of interacting elements, possess some degree of consciousness, some level of experience, though much less than the consciousness of a human brain. IIT does not claim that electrons are conscious, because a single electron does not generate integrated information, does not create a unified whole, but it does suggest that consciousness is not limited to brains, not limited to biological systems, but is present wherever there is integrated information, wherever there is a system that is unified. irreducible, more than the sum of its parts. The philosopher Philip Goff has argued that panpsychism offers the best solution to the hard problem, the best explanation for why physical processes give rise to subjective experience. According to Goff, if consciousness is a fundamental property of matter, then there is no mystery about how it arises from physical processes. Because it does not arise, it is already there, present in the fundamental constituents of matter. And what the brain does is not create consciousness, but combine it, integrate it, organize it into the complex, unified consciousness that we experience. This avoids the explanatory gap, the difficulty of explaining how matter becomes mind, because mind is not something separate from matter, not something that emerges from matter, but is an intrinsic aspect of matter, a fundamental property that is present at all levels of reality. Panpsychism, according to Goff, is not a mystical or supernatural view, but a naturalistic view, a view that takes consciousness seriously, that recognizes it as a fundamental feature of the natural world, on par with mass, charge, and other fundamental properties. But panpsychism is controversial, and it faces significant challenges. One challenge is the lack of empirical evidence. How can we test the claim that electrons or atoms possess some form of experience? How can we measure or detect this proto-consciousness? Panpsychism makes predictions about the nature of reality, about the fundamental structure of matter. But these predictions are difficult or impossible to test with current scientific methods, making panpsychism more of a metaphysical hypothesis than a scientific theory. Another challenge is the intuition that consciousness requires complexity, that it is a product of brains, of neural networks, of information processing, and that simple systems like electrons or atoms lack the necessary structure, the necessary organization to support any form of experience, even a primitive one. This intuition is strong, and it is supported by the fact that we only observe consciousness in complex systems, in organisms with brains, and we have no evidence of consciousness in simple physical systems. Cosmopsychism is a variant of panpsychism that addresses some of these challenges by proposing that consciousness is not present in the smallest constituents of matter, like electrons or atoms, but is instead a property of the universe as a whole, a cosmic consciousness that is fundamental. That exists at the largest scale, and from which individual consciousnesses, like human consciousnesses, are derived, are parts, are manifestations. According to cosmopsychism, the universe itself is conscious, and our individual consciousnesses are like whirlpools in a stream, temporary patterns, localized concentrations of the universal consciousness, arising and dissolving within the larger whole. This avoids the combination problem, because there is no need to explain how micro-experiences combine to form macro-experiences. Instead, macro-experiences are fundamental, and micro-experiences are derived, are parts of the whole. Cosmopsychism is even more speculative than panpsychism, even more difficult to test. But it offers a grand unified vision of consciousness and cosmos, a vision in which mind and matter are not separate, not opposed, but are aspects of a single unified reality. The philosopher Thomas Nagel, in his book Mind and Cosmos, has argued that materialism, the view that everything is physical, is inadequate to explain consciousness, that consciousness points to something fundamentally non-physical, something that cannot be captured by the methods of physics and chemistry, something that requires a new kind of science, a science that takes consciousness as a fundamental feature of reality, not as an epiphenomenon, not as a byproduct, but as a constitutive element of the natural world. Nagel does not endorse panpsychism explicitly, but he suggests that some form of neutral monism, the view that mind and matter are both aspects of a more fundamental substance, or some form of teleology, the view that the universe has inherent purposes, inherent tendencies toward the development of consciousness, may be necessary to explain the existence of consciousness, to bridge the gap between the physical and the mental. Quantum mechanics has sometimes been invoked in discussions of consciousness, with some physicists and philosophers suggesting that quantum phenomena, such as superposition, entanglement, and wave function collapse, may play a role in consciousness, may explain how the brain generates subjective experience, may provide a bridge between the physical and the mental. The physicist Roger Penrose and the anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff have proposed the orchestrated objective reduction theory, or ORC-R, which suggests that consciousness arises from quantum computations in microtubules, protein structures inside neurons, and that the collapse of quantum superpositions in these microtubules gives rise to moments of conscious experience. This theory is highly speculative, and it has been criticized by many physicists and neuroscientists who argue that the brain is too warm, too wet, too noisy for quantum coherence to be maintained, that quantum effects are washed out by thermal fluctuations, by decoherence, and that there is no evidence that quantum mechanics plays any role in neural processing or in consciousness. But the theory persists, attracting interest, generating debate, because it offers a potential solution to the hard problem, a way of connecting the physical and the mental, the objective and the subjective, through the strange counterintuitive phenomena of quantum mechanics. The idea that consciousness might be fundamental, that it might be woven into the fabric of reality, resonates with certain mystical and spiritual traditions, particularly in Eastern philosophy, in Vedanta, in Buddhism, in Taoism, which have long held that consciousness is not a product of the brain, not a property of individual organisms, but is the ground of all being, the ultimate reality, the source from which all things arise and to which all things return. In Vedanta, the concept of Brahman refers to the ultimate unchanging reality, the pure consciousness that underlies all existence, and Atman, the individual self, is ultimately identical to Brahman, meaning that your true nature, your deepest self, is not the individual ego, not the personal identity, but is the universal consciousness, the infinite awareness that is the essence of all things. In Buddhism, the concept of Buddha nature refers to the inherent potential for enlightenment, for awakening that is present in all beings, the luminous awareness that is always present, always here, obscured by ignorance, by attachment, by the illusion of a separate self, but revealed through meditation, through insight, through the direct experience of the nature of mind. These spiritual traditions do not offer scientific theories, do not provide empirical evidence, do not make testable predictions, but they offer a different perspective, a different way of understanding consciousness, not as a problem to be solved, not as a mystery to be explained, but as a reality to be experienced, to be explored, to be realized. They suggest that consciousness is not something you have, not something your brain produces, but something you are, something that is always present, always here, the silent witness, the pure awareness, the luminous presence that is the ground of all experience, the source of all perception, the essence of all being. And in the quiet stillness of meditation, in the deep silence of contemplation, you can touch this awareness, you can rest in this presence, you can recognize your true nature, beyond the thoughts, beyond the emotions, beyond the story of the self, beyond the brain, beyond the body, beyond the world, in the vast, open, timeless space of pure consciousness. The question of whether consciousness is fundamental, whether it is a property of the universe itself, or whether it is produced by brains, by neurons, by physical processes, remains open, unresolved, a matter of ongoing debate, ongoing research, ongoing exploration. Science has made tremendous progress in understanding the neural correlates of consciousness, the brain mechanisms that support perception, memory, attention, decision-making. But it has not yet solved the hard problem, has not yet explained why these mechanisms give rise to subjective experience, to qualia, to the feeling of being conscious. Panpsychism offers one possible answer, a radical answer, a challenging answer, but an answer that takes consciousness seriously, that recognizes it as a fundamental feature of reality, not as an accident, not as a byproduct, but as something essential, something that is woven into the very fabric of the universe. Whether this answer is correct, whether consciousness is truly fundamental, remains to be seen, but the question itself, the exploration of this question, deepens our understanding, expands our perspective, opens our minds to new possibilities, new ways of thinking about consciousness, about reality, about the nature of existence. And as you rest in the quiet of this moment, as you allow your thoughts to settle, your mind to still, you can sense the mystery, the profound mystery of consciousness. The fact that you are aware that there is something it is like to be you, that you experience the world, that you exist, not as a problem to be solved, not as a puzzle to be figured out, but as a wonder, as a gift, as a miracle, the simple, undeniable, luminous fact of your own awareness, the consciousness that is always here, always now, the silent presence that witnesses all, that knows all. That is the ground of all experience, the essence of all being, the light that illuminates the world, the awareness that is reading these words, that is breathing this breath, that is alive, awake, present, here now, in this moment, in this eternal, timeless, boundless space of pure being. There are moments when the constant chatter of the mind falls silent, when the narrative of the self dissolves, when time seems to stop, and all that remains is pure awareness, pure presence, a state of consciousness so clear, so vivid, so immediate, that it feels more real than ordinary waking life. These moments can occur spontaneously, unexpectedly, in nature, in art, in music, in moments of intense focus or profound relaxation, but they can also be cultivated, trained, developed through practices like meditation, through states like flow, through the deliberate alteration of consciousness. The neuroscience of these altered states, these non-ordinary modes of awareness, reveals that consciousness is not fixed, not static, not limited to the default mode of thinking and planning and remembering, but is flexible, malleable, capable of profound transformation, capable of accessing states that are radically different from ordinary waking consciousness, states that offer insight, healing, creativity, connection, and a direct experience of the nature of mind itself. Meditation in its many forms is a practice of training attention, of cultivating awareness, of observing the mind without judgment, without attachment, without trying to change anything, simply witnessing the flow of thoughts, sensations, emotions as they arise and pass away. Mindfulness meditation, one of the most widely studied forms, involves focusing attention on the present moment, on the breath, on bodily sensations, on sounds, on whatever is arising in awareness, and when the mind wanders, as it inevitably does, gently bringing attention back to the present, back to the breath, back to the anchor. This simple practice, repeated over time, has profound effects on the brain, on the structure of neural networks, on the patterns of activity, on the way consciousness operates. Studies using fMRI and EEG have shown that long-term meditation practice is associated with changes in brain structure, with increased grey matter density in regions involved in attention, in emotion regulation, in self-awareness, including the prefrontal cortex, the insula, and the hippocampus. Meditation also increases the thickness of the cortex in these regions, suggesting that meditation promotes neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize, to form new connections, to adapt to experience. Changes in the patterns of brain activity, with experienced meditators showing increased activity in the prefrontal cortex during meditation, reflecting enhanced attention and executive control, and decreased activity in the default mode network, reflecting reduced mind wandering, reduced self-referential thought, reduced rumination. The insula, a region deep within the cerebral cortex that is involved in interoception, in the awareness of internal bodily states shows particularly strong changes in meditators. The insula integrates signals from the body, from the heart, from the lungs, from the gut, creating a sense of the physiological self, a sense of being embodied, a sense of being alive. Meditation enhances interoceptive awareness, strengthens the connection between mind and body, allows you to sense subtle changes in your internal state, to detect emotions as they arise in the body, to recognize stress, tension, discomfort before they escalate, before they become overwhelming. This enhanced interoceptive awareness is associated with better emotional regulation, with greater resilience, with the ability to respond to challenges with equanimity rather than reactivity, with wisdom rather than impulse. The reduction in default mode network activity during meditation is particularly significant because it corresponds to the subjective experience of selflessness, of non-dual awareness, of a dissolution of the boundary between self and world, between subject and object. When the default mode network quiets, when the narrative of the self falls silent, what remains is pure awareness, pure presence, a sense of being without the story, without the commentary, without the constant mental chatter that normally fills consciousness. This is not a loss of consciousness, not a blank state, but a shift in the mode of consciousness, a shift from thinking to being, from doing to simply witnessing, from the constructed self to the awareness that is always here, always now, the silent ground of all experience. Meditation also affects the autonomic nervous system, the system that regulates involuntary functions like heart rate, breathing, digestion, stress response. Meditation activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, reducing heart rate, lowering blood pressure, slowing breathing, promoting relaxation, reducing the activity of the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight system, which is activated during stress, during threat, during arousal. This shift in autonomic balance has profound effects on health, reducing stress, reducing inflammation, improving immune function, promoting healing, demonstrating that meditation is not just a mental practice but a whole body practice, affecting not just the brain but the entire organism. The neurotransmitter systems are also affected by meditation. Studies have shown that meditation increases levels of serotonin, a neurotransmitter involved in mood regulation, in happiness, in well-being, and increases levels of GABA, an inhibitory neurotransmitter that reduces neural activity, promotes relaxation, reduces anxiety. Meditation also affects the endogenous opioid system, the brain's natural pain relief system, increasing the release of endorphins, which produce feelings of pleasure, of euphoria, of well-being, similar to the effects of opioid drugs, but without the harmful side effects, without the addiction, without the dependence. These neurochemical changes contribute to the subjective effects of meditation, to the sense of calm, of peace, of contentment, of bliss that meditators often report. Different forms of meditation produce different patterns of brain activity, different subjective experiences, different effects on consciousness. Focused attention meditation, in which you concentrate on a single object, such as the breath or a mantra, increases activity in the attention networks, strengthens the ability to sustain focus, to resist distraction, to maintain concentration over long periods. Open monitoring meditation, in which you observe whatever arises in awareness without focusing on any particular object, enhances the ability to detect stimuli, to notice subtle changes, to maintain a broad receptive awareness. Loving kindness meditation activates the compassion networks, increases positive emotions, enhances social connection. Transcendental meditation, which involves the repetition of a mantra, produces a state of deep relaxation, of restful alertness characterized by reduced metabolic activity, reduced oxygen consumption, increased alpha waves on the EEG, a state that is distinct from both waking and sleeping, a state of pure consciousness, of transcendence, Flow is another altered state of consciousness, a state of complete absorption in an activity, a state in which you are so focused, so engaged, so immersed in what you are doing, that everything else disappears. Time seems to stop, the sense of self dissolves, and action and awareness merge into a seamless whole. Flow occurs during activities that are challenging but not overwhelming, that require skill but are within your capabilities, that provide clear goals and immediate feedback, such as playing music, playing sports, creating art, solving problems, engaging in any activity that demands your full attention, your full presence. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who coined the term flow, described it as the optimal experience, the state in which people are happiest, most creative, most productive, most alive. The neuroscience of flow reveals that this state is associated with a specific pattern of brain activity, characterized by transient hyperfrontality, a temporary reduction in activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region involved in executive control, in self-awareness in the sense of time, in the narrative of the self. During flow, the prefrontal cortex quiets, the default mode network deactivates, and the brain shifts into a more automatic, more intuitive, more efficient mode of processing, allowing you to perform complex tasks without conscious effort, without deliberation, without the interference of the self-conscious mind. This is why athletes in flow describe their performance as effortless, as automatic, as if the body knows what to do without the mind having to think about it, as if they are watching themselves perform from the outside, as if they are not doing it, but it is being done through them. Flow is also associated with increased activity in the reward system, the network of brain regions involved in motivation, in pleasure, in reinforcement, including the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens. During flow, the brain releases dopamine, a neurotransmitter involved in reward, in motivation, in the experience of pleasure, creating a sense of enjoyment, of satisfaction, of intrinsic motivation, driving you to continue the activity, to seek out flow states, to engage in activities that produce this optimal experience. This is why flow is so addictive, why people who experience flow regularly seek it out, why they structure their lives around activities that produce flow, why they are willing to endure hardship to overcome obstacles, to push themselves to the limit in pursuit of this state. The experience of flow also involves changes in the perception of time, a phenomenon known as time dilation or time compression. During flow, the internal clock seems to speed up or slow down. Minutes can feel like seconds. Hours can pass in what feels like moments, because the brain regions involved in tracking time, in maintaining temporal awareness, are suppressed during flow, allowing you to become fully absorbed in the present moment, fully immersed in the activity without the distraction of thinking about how much time has passed, how much time remains, what you need to do next. This timelessness is one of the defining characteristics of flow, one of the reasons why flow is so deeply satisfying, so profoundly engaging, because it liberates you from the tyranny of the clock, from the constant pressure of time, allowing you to simply be, to simply do, to simply exist in the eternal now. Altered states of consciousness can also be induced by sensory deprivation, by isolation, by fasting, by sleep deprivation, by rhythmic drumming, by chanting, by dancing, by hyperventilation, by extreme physical exertion, by any practice that disrupts the normal patterns of sensory input, of neural activity, of brain chemistry, creating conditions in which consciousness can shift, can transform, can access modes of awareness that are normally hidden, normally inaccessible. These practices have been used for thousands of years in spiritual and shamanic traditions, in rituals, in ceremonies, in initiations, to induce visions, to communicate with spirits, to access altered states of consciousness that are believed to provide insight, healing, guidance, connection to the sacred, to the divine, to the ultimate reality. The neuroscience of these practices is still being explored, but it is clear that they affect the brain in profound ways, disrupting the default mode network, altering neurotransmitter levels, changing the patterns of neural activity, creating conditions in which the boundaries of the self become permeable, in which the distinction between self and world dissolves, in which consciousness expands beyond the ordinary limits of perception, of thought, of identity. These altered states are not hallucinations, not delusions, not pathological, but are valid modes of consciousness, different ways of experiencing reality, different perspectives on the nature of mind, of self, of existence. The practice of loving-kindness meditation, or metta-meditation, involves cultivating feelings of compassion, of kindness, of goodwill, towards oneself and toward others, starting with oneself, then extending to loved ones, to neutral people, to difficult people, and finally to all beings everywhere. Studies have shown that loving-kindness meditation increases activity in brain regions involved in empathy, in compassion, in positive emotion, including the insular and the anterior cingulate cortex, and that it increases connectivity between these regions and the prefrontal cortex, suggesting that compassion is not just a feeling but a skill, a capacity that can be trained, that can be developed, that can be strengthened through practice. Loving-kindness meditation also increases positive emotions, reduces negative emotions, improves social connection, reduces prejudice, increases altruistic behavior, demonstrating that meditation can transform not just the individual mind but also the social world, the relationships between people, the quality of human interaction, the experience of awe, the feeling of being in the presence of something vast, something greater than oneself, something that transcends ordinary understanding, is another altered state of consciousness, often induced by nature, by art, by music, by spiritual experiences, by moments of profound beauty or profound insight. Awe is associated with a sense of smallness, of humility, of connection to something larger, and it has been shown to reduce activity in the default mode network, to quiet the narrative of the self, to shift attention away from personal concerns, toward the present moment, toward the world, toward the interconnectedness of all things. R also increases prosocial behavior, increases generosity, increases ethical behavior, suggesting that this emotion, this state of consciousness, serves an important social function, binding individuals to groups, to communities, to the larger whole, fostering cooperation, fostering compassion, fostering a sense of shared humanity. The neuroscience of presence, of meditation, of flow, of altered states, reveals that consciousness is not a single fixed mode of awareness, but a spectrum, a continuum, a range of possible states, each with its own characteristics, its own neural correlates, its own subjective qualities. Ordinary waking consciousness, the default mode, is just one point on this spectrum, one way of being aware, one way of experiencing reality, and it is not necessarily the optimal way, not necessarily the most accurate way, not necessarily the most fulfilling way. By exploring altered states, by cultivating presence, by training attention, by quieting the mind, you can access other modes of consciousness, other ways of being, other perspectives on reality, discovering that the mind is far more flexible, far more vast, far more mysterious than you ever imagined. And in the stillness of this moment, in the silence between breaths, in the space between thoughts, you can touch this presence, this pure awareness, this luminous consciousness that is always here, always now, the ground of all experience, the witness to all phenomena, the silent, spacious, timeless awareness that is your true nature, beyond the self, beyond the story, beyond the endless fluctuations of the mind, resting in the simple, profound, undeniable fact of being, of existing, of being aware, here now in this eternal moment, in this boundless space of pure presence. Consciousness did not begin with humans. It is ancient, woven into the fabric of life itself, present in forms we are only beginning to understand, in creatures whose minds are profoundly different from our own, yet equally real, equally valid, equally deserving of wonder. The question of animal consciousness, of whether other species experience subjective states, whether there is something it is like to be a bat, a dolphin, an octopus, a bee, has long been debated by philosophers and scientists, but the evidence is now overwhelming that consciousness is not unique to humans, not a special property of the human brain, but is distributed across the animal kingdom, present in many species, in many forms, shaped by evolution, by ecology, by the specific challenges and opportunities that each species faces in its environment. The study of animal consciousness reveals that awareness is not a single thing, not a binary property that you either have or you don't, but is a spectrum, a continuum, with different species possessing different degrees of consciousness, different types of consciousness, different ways of experiencing the world. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, signed by a group of prominent neuroscientists in 2012, stated that the weight of evidence indicates that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. Non-human animals, including all mammals and birds, and many other creatures, including octopuses, also possess these neurological substrates. This declaration was significant because it represented a scientific consensus, a recognition that consciousness is not limited to humans, that the neural mechanisms that support consciousness in humans are also present in other species, and that these mechanisms likely give rise to subjective experience, to qualia, to the feeling of being conscious, in these other species as well. The mirror test, developed by psychologist Gordon Gallup, is one of the most widely used tests of self-awareness in animals. In this test, an animal is marked with a spot of paint or dye on a part of its body that it cannot see without a mirror, and then the animal is presented with a mirror. If the animal uses the mirror to inspect the mark, to touch it, to try to remove it, this is taken as evidence that the animal recognizes itself in the mirror, that it has a sense of self, a sense of being a distinct individual, separate from the environment, separate from other individuals. Humans typically pass the mirror test around 18 months of age, and several other species have also been shown to pass the test, including great apes, elephants, dolphins, and magpies, suggesting that these species possess some form of self-awareness, some sense of I, some recognition of themselves as distinct entities. But the mirror test has limitations. It assumes that self-awareness is visual, that it requires the ability to recognize oneself in a mirror, but many species rely more on other senses, on smell, on sound, on touch, and may have forms of self-awareness that are not captured by the mirror test. Dogs, for example, typically fail the mirror test, but they show evidence of self-awareness in olfactory tests, recognizing their own scent, distinguishing it from the scents of other dogs, suggesting that they have a sense of self that is based on smell rather than vision. The mirror test also assumes that self-awareness is important for all species, but for many species, recognizing oneself in a mirror may not be relevant, may not be adaptive, may not be something that evolution has selected for, and the failure to pass the mirror test does not necessarily mean that the species lacks consciousness or self-awareness. The study of animal cognition has revealed that many species possess sophisticated cognitive abilities that were once thought to be unique to humans, including tool use, problem solving, planning for the future, understanding cause and effect, recognizing individuals, forming social bonds, communicating with complex signals, and even exhibiting behaviors that suggest empathy, altruism, and a sense of fairness. Crows and ravens, for example, are capable of using tools, of solving multi-step problems, of planning for future needs, of recognizing individual humans and remembering their faces for years, demonstrating a level of intelligence that rivals that of great apes. Elephants show empathy, mourning their dead, comforting distressed individuals, cooperating to solve problems, suggesting that they have rich emotional lives, complex social relationships, and a deep understanding of the minds of others. Chimpanzees and bonobos, our closest living relatives, share approximately 98% of their DNA with humans, and they exhibit cognitive abilities that are remarkably similar to our own. Chimpanzees use tools in the wild, fashioning sticks to extract termites from mounds, using stones to crack nuts, using leaves as sponges to soak up water. They engage in complex social politics, forming alliances, competing for status, reconciling after conflicts, suggesting an understanding of social relationships, of power dynamics, of the minds of others. They show evidence of theory of mind, the ability to understand that others have beliefs and desires that may differ from their own, and they engage in deception, in tactical manipulation, in behaviors that require understanding what others know and don't know. The cognitive similarities between humans and great apes suggest that consciousness, self-awareness, and complex cognition evolved in our common ancestor millions of years ago and have been elaborated and refined in different lineages. Dolphins and whales possess large, complex brains with highly developed cerebral cortices, and they exhibit behaviors that suggest high levels of intelligence, including self-awareness, tool use, complex communication, cooperative hunting, and cultural transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next. Dolphins have been observed using sponges as tools to protect their snouts while foraging on the seafloor, a behavior that is learned from their mothers and passed down through generations, demonstrating cultural learning, the transmission of knowledge through social learning rather than through genetic inheritance. Whales sing complex songs that change over time, that vary between populations, that may serve functions related to mating, to navigation, to social bonding, suggesting a rich acoustic culture, a form of communication that is far more complex than simple signals, that may convey information, emotion, identity, history. The social structures of dolphins and whales are complex, with long-term bonds between individuals, cooperative care of young, and sophisticated forms of communication that include signature whistles, unique calls that function like names, allowing individuals to identify themselves and to call specific others. The brain of the dolphin contains spindle neurons, specialized cells that are also found in humans, great apes, and elephants, and that are thought to be involved in social cognition, in empathy, in the processing of complex emotions. The presence of these neurons in such distantly related species suggests convergent evolution, the independent evolution of similar structures in response to similar selective pressures. In this case, the demands of complex social relationships, of understanding the minds of others. The octopus presents a particularly fascinating case of animal consciousness because it is an invertebrate, a creature that is very distantly related to humans, that evolved a large, complex brain independently through convergent evolution and that exhibits behaviors that suggest intelligence, curiosity, problem-solving ability, and possibly even subjective experience. Octopuses have been observed escaping from tanks, opening jars to get food, using tools, changing color and texture to camouflage themselves or to communicate, and even playing, engaging in behaviors that seem to have no obvious survival function, but that suggest a capacity for exploration, for novelty seeking, for enjoyment. The octopus brain is organized very differently from the vertebrate brain, with most of its neurons distributed in its arms rather than centralized in a single brain, raising the question of whether the octopus has a unified consciousness, a single eye, or whether each arm has its own form of awareness, its own local processing, its own semi-autonomous intelligence. The question of whether insects possess consciousness is more controversial, more difficult to answer, because insects have very small brains, very simple nervous systems compared to mammals and birds. But they also exhibit complex behaviors, including navigation, communication, social organization, learning, and memory that suggests some form of information processing, some form of awareness, even if it is very different from human consciousness. Bees, for example, perform the waggle dance, a complex form of communication in which a bee that has found a food source returns to the hive and performs a dance that encodes information about the direction and distance to the food, allowing other bees to locate it. This suggests that bees have a representation of space, a memory of locations, an ability to communicate abstract information, and possibly some form of subjective experience of the world, even if it is very simple, very different from our own. Recent research has shown that bees can learn, can remember, can recognize patterns, can even count, demonstrating cognitive abilities that were once thought to require much larger brains. Bees show evidence of emotional states, with their behavior changing in response to positive and negative experiences, suggesting that they may experience something analogous to pleasure and pain, to optimism and pessimism, to moods and feelings. The question of whether these emotional states are accompanied by subjective experience, by qualia, by consciousness, remains open, but the evidence suggests that even insects, with their tiny brains, may possess some form of awareness, some form of inner life, however simple, however different from our own. The evolution of consciousness is a deep mystery, a question that touches on the origins of life, the nature of mind, the relationship between brain and experience. Consciousness likely did not appear suddenly, fully formed, but evolved gradually over millions of years, starting with simple forms of awareness, simple forms of responsiveness to the environment, and becoming more complex, more sophisticated, more integrated, as nervous systems evolved, as new cognitive capacities emerged. The earliest forms of consciousness may have been very simple, perhaps just a basic sensitivity to stimuli, a basic ability to distinguish self from non-self, a basic feeling of pleasure or pain, of attraction or aversion. But even these simple forms of awareness would have provided an evolutionary advantage, allowing organisms to respond more effectively to their environment, to seek out resources, to avoid dangers, to survive and reproduce. The hard problem of consciousness, the question of why physical processes give rise to subjective experience, is even harder when we consider animal consciousness. Because we cannot ask animals about their experiences, we cannot know directly what it is like to be a bat, a dolphin, an octopus, a bee. We can observe their behavior, we can study their brains, we can make inferences about their mental states, but we can never know for certain whether they are conscious, whether there is something it is like to be them, whether they experience qualia, whether they have an inner life. This is the problem of other minds, the philosophical problem of knowing whether other beings, whether other humans or other animals are conscious, and it is a problem that cannot be solved definitively, that requires us to make inferences, to use analogy, to extend our understanding of our own consciousness to other beings, recognizing that their consciousness may be very different from our own, but no less real, no less valid, no less deserving of moral consideration. The recognition of animal consciousness has profound ethical implications, because if animals are conscious, if they experience pain, pleasure, fear, joy, then they have interests, they have welfare, they can be harmed, they can suffer, and we have moral obligations toward them, obligations to avoid causing unnecessary suffering, to respect their autonomy, to consider their well-being in our decisions, in our actions, in the way we treat them. The study of animal consciousness challenges the anthropocentric view, the view that humans are the center of the universe, the only beings that matter, the only beings with moral status, and it invites us to expand our circle of compassion, to recognize that we are not alone, that we share this planet with countless other conscious beings, each with their own perspective, their own experience, their own way of being in the world. The philosopher Thomas Nagel, in his famous essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, argued that we can never fully understand what it is like to be a bat, because the bat's experience is fundamentally different from our own, shaped by echolocation, by flight, by a sensory world that is alien to us, that we cannot imagine, that we cannot access. But Nagel's point was not that we should give up trying to understand animal consciousness, but rather that we should recognize the limits of our understanding, that we should approach animal consciousness with humility, with curiosity, with a willingness to accept that there are forms of experience, forms of awareness, that are radically different from our own, that we may never fully comprehend, but that are nonetheless real, nonetheless valid, nonetheless worthy of respect. And as you rest in the quiet of this moment, as you allow your awareness to expand, you can sense the vastness of consciousness, the fact that it is not limited to you, not limited to humans, but is present in countless forms, in countless species, in the bird singing outside your window, in the dog sleeping at your feet, in the whale swimming in the deep ocean, in the bee gathering pollen from a flower, each a center of experience, each a universe of awareness, each a manifestation of the mystery, the profound mystery of consciousness, the light that shines in all living things, the awareness that is the ground of all being, the silent witness that is present in every creature, in every moment, in every breath, connecting all life, all experience, all existence, in the vast interconnected web of consciousness that is the living earth. After all the theories, all the experiments, all the insights from neuroscience and philosophy and contemplative practice, consciousness remains what it has always been, a mystery, a wonder, a presence that cannot be fully explained, cannot be reduced to equations or mechanisms, cannot be captured in words. We have learned much about consciousness, about the brain regions that support it, about the neural correlates that accompany it, about the cognitive functions it enables, about the ways it can be altered, disrupted, enhanced, transformed. We know that the prefrontal cortex is involved in executive control, that the default mode network constructs the self, that the global workspace broadcasts information to create unified awareness, that integrated information may be the essence of consciousness, that meditation can quiet the mind, that dreams reveal consciousness without an external world, that animals possess their own forms of awareness, shaped by evolution, by ecology, by the demands of their particular ways of life. We have mapped the brain, measured its activity, identified its networks, traced its connections, and yet the fundamental question remains unanswered. Why does all this neural activity, all this information processing, all this complexity give rise to subjective experience, to the feeling of being conscious, to the inner light of awareness? The hard problem persists, not because we lack data, not because we lack theories, but because there is something about consciousness that resists explanation, that eludes the methods of science, that cannot be captured by third-person observation, by objective measurement, by the reduction of experience to physical processes. Consciousness is inherently subjective, inherently first-person, inherently private, and this subjectivity creates an explanatory gap, a gulf between the objective world of neurons and synapses and neurotransmitters and the subjective world of qualia, of feelings, of experiences, of what it is like to be you, to see red, to feel pain, to experience joy, to be aware. Some philosophers and scientists believe that the hard problem is a real problem, a genuine mystery, a question that may never be answered, that may lie beyond the reach of science, beyond the capacity of human understanding. They argue that consciousness is fundamentally different from other phenomena in nature, that it cannot be explained in the same way that we explain digestion or photosynthesis or gravity, that it requires a new kind of science, a new kind of explanation, or perhaps no explanation at all, but simply acceptance, recognition, acknowledgement of the mystery. This view, sometimes called Mysterianism, suggests that there are limits to human knowledge, that there are questions we cannot answer, not because we lack the tools or the intelligence, but because the questions themselves are beyond our cognitive reach, beyond the structure of our minds, beyond the categories of our thought. The The philosopher Colin McGinn has argued that consciousness may be a cognitive closure for humans, meaning that our minds are simply not equipped to understand it, just as a dog cannot understand quantum mechanics, not because quantum mechanics is inherently mysterious, but because the dog's brain lacks the necessary cognitive architecture. According to McGinn, consciousness may be perfectly natural, perfectly physical, perfectly explicable in principle, but inexplicable to us, to human minds, because we lack the conceptual resources, the cognitive capacities, the mental tools to grasp the explanation. This is a humbling thought, a reminder that human intelligence, for all its achievements, for all its power, has limits, has boundaries, has blind spots, and consciousness may lie in one of those blind spots, forever beyond our reach. Other philosophers and scientists believe that the hard problem is not a real problem, but a confusion, a mistake, a product of dualistic thinking, of the assumption that mind and matter are fundamentally different, that consciousness is something separate from the physical world. They argue that consciousness is a physical process, that it is identical to certain patterns of neural activity, that there is no explanatory gap, no mystery, only a lack of understanding, a gap in our knowledge that will eventually be filled as neuroscience advances, as we learn more about the brain, as we develop better theories, better models, better explanations. This view, sometimes called physicalism or materialism, suggests that everything is physical, that consciousness is just another physical phenomenon, that it can be explained in principle by the same methods that explain everything else in nature. The philosopher Daniel Dennett has argued that consciousness is not what it seems, that our intuitions about consciousness are misleading, that the hard problem is based on a false assumption, the assumption that there is something special, something ineffable, something beyond the physical, about subjective experience. According to Dennett, consciousness is a complex of cognitive functions, of information processing, of neural mechanisms. And once we understand these functions, these processes, these mechanisms, the mystery dissolves, the hard problem disappears, and we are left with a perfectly natural, perfectly explicable phenomenon. Dennett's view is controversial, and many philosophers and scientists find it unsatisfying, find it reductive, find it unable to account for the subjective quality of experience, for the what-it-is likeness, for the qualia that seems so central to consciousness. But perhaps the hard problem is neither a genuine mystery nor a mere confusion, but a pointer, a signpost, a reminder that consciousness is special, that it is the ground of all experience, the foundation of all knowledge, the condition of all science, and that it cannot be fully objectified, cannot be fully externalized, cannot be fully explained, because it is the explainer, the knower, the observer, the subject that is doing the explaining, the knowing, the observing. You cannot step outside of consciousness to examine it, because consciousness is what you are. Consciousness is the space in which all examination occurs, the light by which all things are seen, the awareness that is always present, always here, always now, the silent witness that cannot be witnessed, the seer that cannot be seen, the knower that cannot be known. The study of consciousness, then, is not just a scientific endeavor, not just an intellectual puzzle, but a journey of self-discovery, exploration of the nature of your own being, an investigation into the most intimate, most immediate, most undeniable aspect of your existence, the fact that you are aware, that you experience, that you exist. And this investigation does not end with answers, with explanations, with theories, but with a deepening of the mystery, a recognition of the profound strangeness of consciousness, the fact that it exists at all, the fact that the universe has given rise to beings who can know themselves, who can reflect on their own existence, who can ask questions about the nature of reality, the nature of mind, the nature of awareness. There is something paradoxical about consciousness, something that defies easy categorization, easy explanation. It is both the most obvious thing in the world, the most immediate, the most undeniable, You cannot doubt that you are conscious, that you are aware, that you are experiencing this moment. And yet it is also the most mysterious, the most elusive, the most difficult to explain. It is both utterly private, accessible only to you, known only from within, and yet it is also universal, shared by all conscious beings, the common ground of all experience, the thread that connects all life. It is both a product of the brain, dependent on neurons and synapses and neurotransmitters, and yet it is also the condition of all knowledge of the brain, the awareness that makes neuroscience possible, the consciousness that observes the neurons, that interprets the data, that formulates the theories. Science has given us tremendous insights into consciousness, has revealed the neural mechanisms that support perception, memory, attention, emotion, decision-making, has shown us how the brain constructs the self, how it generates the sense of time, how it creates the illusion of continuity, how it binds disparate elements into a unified whole. But science cannot tell you what it is like to be you, cannot capture the subjective quality of your experience, cannot explain why there is something it is like to see red, to hear music, to feel love, to be alive. This is not a failure of science, not a limitation of the scientific method, but a recognition of the unique nature of consciousness, the fact that it is both the object of study and the subject doing the studying, both the phenomenon to be explained and the explainer, both the mystery and the one who wonders at the mystery. Philosophy has grappled with consciousness for millennia, has explored the relationship between mind and body, between subject and object, between appearance and reality, has developed sophisticated theories, subtle arguments, profound insights into the nature of experience, the nature of knowledge, the nature of being. But philosophy, too, reaches its limits when confronted with the hard problem, when asked to explain why physical processes give rise to subjective experience, when asked to bridge the explanatory gap, when asked to solve the mystery of consciousness. Philosophy can clarify the question, can expose confusions, can reveal assumptions, can map the conceptual terrain, but it cannot provide a final answer, cannot dissolve the mystery, cannot make consciousness less strange, less wondrous, less miraculous. The history of philosophy is filled with attempts to solve the mind-body problem, to explain the relationship between consciousness and the physical world. Descartes proposed dualism, the view that mind and body are separate substances, that consciousness is non-physical, that it interacts with the brain, but is not identical to it. This view preserves the specialness of consciousness, its irreducibility to matter, but it creates a new problem. How can a non-physical mind interact with a physical body? How can something immaterial cause something material to move? Materialism solves this problem by denying the existence of the non-physical, by claiming that everything is matter, that consciousness is just a physical process. But it struggles to account for the subjective quality of experience, for the what it is likeness that seems so central to consciousness. Idealism takes the opposite approach, claiming that everything is mental, that matter is a construct of mind, that consciousness is fundamental, but it struggles to account for the apparent independence of the physical world, for the fact that the world seems to exist whether or not we are conscious of it. Contemplative traditions, the practices of meditation, of mindfulness, of inquiry into the nature of mind, offer a different approach, not seeking to explain consciousness but to explore it directly, to investigate it from within, to experience it in its pure form, free from concepts, free from theories, free from the overlay of thought. These traditions suggest that consciousness is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be realized, not a mystery to be explained, but a presence to be recognized, not something you have, but something you are, the luminous awareness that is always here, always now, the silent space in which all experience arises and passes away, the ground of being, the essence of existence, the true nature of self. In meditation, when the mind becomes still, when the narrative of the self quiets, What remains is pure awareness, pure presence, consciousness without content, awareness without an object, the simple, undeniable fact of being conscious, of being aware, of being here, now, in this moment. This is not a special state, not an achievement, not something rare or difficult, but the most ordinary, most immediate, most accessible aspect of your experience. The awareness that is reading these words, that is breathing this breath, that is alive, awake, present. The consciousness that is always here, always available, always waiting to be recognized, to be acknowledged, to be rested in. The mystery of consciousness, then, is not something to be feared, not something to be frustrated by, not something to be solved, but something to be lived with, to be appreciated, to be wondered at, a reminder that reality is far stranger, far more profound, far more beautiful than our theories, our models, our explanations can capture. Consciousness is the great mystery, the ultimate mystery, the mystery that is closer to you than your own breath, more intimate than your own thoughts, more fundamental than your own existence. And yet it remains, after all our investigations, after all our insights, after all our understanding, a mystery, a wonder, a miracle. Perhaps the mystery of consciousness is not a problem waiting to be solved, but a gift, an invitation to wonder, to awe, to humility, a reminder that we are part of something vast, something incomprehensible, something that exceeds our understanding, our categories, our concepts. The fact that you are conscious, that you are aware, that you are experiencing this moment is not something to be taken for granted, not something to be explained away, not something to be reduced to neural mechanisms, but something to be celebrated, to be honored, to be held in reverence. The miracle of existence, the wonder of being, the mystery of awareness. And so, as you drift towards sleep, as your consciousness shifts, as the boundaries between waking and dreaming blur, as the external world fades and the internal world rises, you can rest in this mystery. You can surrender to this wonder. You can allow yourself to be held by the vast, silent, luminous awareness that is your true nature, the consciousness that is always here, always now, the ground of all experience, the source of all being, the light that illuminates all things. The awareness that is reading these words, that is feeling this breath, that is alive, awake, present here now, in this eternal moment, in this boundless space, in this infinite mystery, the mystery of consciousness, the mystery of being, the mystery of you. Sleep now, knowing that consciousness does not end, does not disappear, but only changes form, shifts mode, continues its eternal dance, its endless exploration, its infinite unfolding, in dreams, in deep sleep, in waking, in all states, in all moments, in all experiences, the silent witness, the pure awareness, the luminous presence that is always here, always now, always you, the consciousness that is the ground of all being, the essence of all existence, the mystery that can never be solved, only lived, only experienced, only known in the direct, immediate, undeniable recognition of your own awareness, your own presence, your own being, here, now, always, forever, in the vast, silent, timeless space of pure consciousness. Rest in this awareness, rest in this presence, rest in this mystery, rest in this simple, profound, undeniable fact of being conscious, of being aware, of being alive, of being here, now, in this moment, in this breath, in this eternal, infinite, boundless space of pure being, pure awareness, pure consciousness, the light that never dims, the presence that never leaves, the awareness that is always here, always now, always you. Good night.